as you may just have overheard, Miss Bennett prefers to be addressed as a marina, right?
That's fine.
Well, it's a grand academic title, but don't be put off by it. The English caste system in young adult literature and beyond. It sounds like a title of a conference at the University of Warwick, if not Oxford, but don't be put off by that. I mean, we'll start with a bit of a mentioning of these two very fascinating novels, right? And well, before I introduce you, well, which might not be necessary anyway, some parents or children may be slightly put off by the content or the theme of these storybooks, as they're all about, well, as there is a lot of dark side of human nature or murder plot involved in some boarding school, right? And, well, the boarding school is undergoing a very interesting time at the moment. As you may know, Britain is cast in an unprecedented historical shadow, like Brexit, globalization, political correctness, and the rise of the working class, or even the prospect of someone like Jeremy Corbyn getting into number 10 Downing Street, right? So young readers in Hong Kong, together with their parents perhaps, may have got addicted to novels like, or stories like Harry Potter, right? If not History Man or the movie History Boys, or even earlier the Dead Poets Society, which is all about a tragedy happening on the campus of a private boarding school in America, however, which all point to one very interesting point, that things are not that nice as they seem, right? which is the most fascinating, I think, spirit of all novels. Things are not that good or that nice or that harmonious as they seem. Right? So Marina comes from a very interesting background, from Manchester, Yorkshire, as you all know, which is a bit rough, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Or sportive.
Yeah.
And her father is Italian, but who prefers to be labeled or called as Phoenician. I don't know why. And Marina was brought up in the UK, but you're also an expert in Shakespeare, right? As far as I know, you have been shuttling between the country and Italy, right? And
That's right.
giving talks on the greatest bard of the history of English literature, right? And I don't know where I should start. Like one of your novels, which starts in the most fascinating way, we all say that is the most important to strike the reader with the first paragraph or even the first sentence, right? The first sentence of this book called Stack is, I think I might be a murderer, right? Which makes everyone itch to keep reading it, to go on, right? Now, I leave that line to you. Now, okay?
Thank you very much.
Kick off this most interesting and fascinating lecture, which I, certainly every one of you, looks forward to hearing.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. It's really delightful to see such a busy fair and to see so many keen readers. This is why I'm not worried about the future, and I'm not worried about civilization, because I think as long as people continue to read and engage with books, then we're going to be okay. That said, I'm going to talk about the English class system in young adult literature and beyond, which basically means the kind of books that inspired me to write Stags and the kind of experiences that one reads about in books or sees in films, as Chip's just mentioned a few really good examples there. And I've been fascinated with this world of privilege for many, many years, and then the result was my first young adult novel, Stags, which is also going to become a film, which is a very interesting genesis for the book. So hopefully it's going to be one of those, it's going to join that canon itself. So Stags stands for St Aidan the Great School. That's why it's called Stags. And the stag antlers represent those kind of emblems that you see, say, in Harry Potter, that every house has an emblem. The school has an emblem, like a crest that you might see on the school blazer or above the school door. And the antlers are very, very important to the book. And they become symbolic of many things, including the stag as prey. And animals aren't the only prey in this book. This is Windsor Castle, actually, which I think many of you will have seen on the TV over the summer. This is a slightly calmer view of Windsor than you may have seen on your TV screens. And the only crowds here are a lovely herd of deer. This, funnily enough, was one of the inspirations for Stags. I imagine the school to look very much like this. And if you can imagine your first day at school, some young people in our country go away as young as 8 years old. So if you can imagine coming down this driveway, the same driveway that Harry and Meghan drove down this summer, and experiencing your first day at a school like this, it's a little bit out-facing. I'm just going to read you a couple of short extracts from the books about what makes a school like this different from the kind of school that, certainly different from the kind of school that I went to, and maybe the schools that you went to too. The point about these schools is that they're different, and they are elite, and they put you in a very particular group. And once you're in that group, as I'll go on to demonstrate, you never really leave it. And it's hugely advantageous to you to be going to school with the right type of people. And that's a particularly pervasive idea in British society. So here, Greer, my heroine, who goes to the kind of school originally that I went to, and then wins a scholarship to Stags, is speaking about what makes the school different. The sports are strange at Stags as well. We don't play ordinary games like netball and hockey and football, but things like fives and real tennis in Tudor wooden courts out by the playing fields. Those playing fields, known as Bede's Piece, are immense, but they're not used for anything standard like athletics, only for sports like rugby, rugger, and lacrosse. Stags has its own theatre, but it doesn't have any fancy lighting or sets. It's a faithful Jacobean replica playhouse lit by candles. Candles! Instead of German and French, we study Latin and Greek. The food, too, is different from normal school food in that it is really nice. Actually, it's amazing. It's the sort you'd get in a really good restaurant, not at all like the slop we used to get at our old school, Bewley Park. Meals were served by women from the local village who seemed perfectly nice, but were rewarded with a nickname, dinner bags. But the major difference between Stags and a normal school is, as you might have guessed, that it costs an absolute fortune. The Stags' parents pay the fees willingly, and it didn't take me long to figure out what they're paying for. They are not paying for their little darlings to benefit from the Jacobean theatre, or the Olympic-sized swimming pool, or for the incredible knock-your-eyes-out beauty of the place. What they're paying for is for their children to be different too. I was trying to think of similarities between Stags and my next book, The Island, which, by the way, is on sale here, and it's not even out yet. It comes out on August the 9th. So what I'm about to read to you, nobody in the world has heard yet. And also, because they're on sale outside, you could potentially be the first people in the world to read The Island. Just a little plug there. The similarity really between the two books is that there are elite schools in both books. This one goes on to be more of a sort of a Lord of the Flies experience. The kids go on a summer camp and their plane crashes and they end up on an island. And on the island, the very carefully laid down hierarchy of the school flips. So the bully becomes the bullied, and the bullied becomes the king of the island. So one of the great ways to keep people down at an English public school is sport. And if you're not good at sport, then you're already not in the club at these particular schools. and it can be one of the great evils of your school days. So here I'm going to read my hero, who's called Lincoln, Link for short, and he's talking about his school, which is called Osney School, and it's in Oxford. I'm not going to attempt an American accent, you'll be pleased to hear. It was actually John Donne, not my dad, who said, "No man is an island entire of itself." I say, if John Donne said that, then John Donne didn't know shit about English schools. And he should have. He really should have. John Donne went to Oxford University at the age of 11. 11! You're not telling me he just fitted in on day one. After all, he was the son of a Welsh ironmonger, probably had weird clothes and a weird halfway accent like mine. I'll bet he had some shitty experiences, which helped him become such an awesome poet later. Maybe they just weren't as shitty as mine. Every weekday morning, I crossed the drawbridge onto Osney Island, this weird kingdom where only games mattered. That little bit of the river that surrounded the island was a daily Rubicon for me, and when I crossed it, I became a different person, a drone, a slave, an island entire of myself. I'd walk through the iron gates, braced like a soldier, expecting the horrors of conflict, which had become every day. Even the towers and mismatched ancient roofs of this mini city, so ancient, so English, didn't lift my heart. I'd tread the passageways, zombie numb, reflections of my face distorted in the bright metal trophies branded with other people's names. I knew these trophies pretty well, because it was part of my lot to polish them. I also had to wax the toppers board with its gilt inlaid names of Sportsman of the Year going all the way back to Georgian times. I had to do strange things to sports equipment, things which had unfamiliar names, waxing, piling, seasoning. I had to wear in new boots that weren't my size until my feet bled. I watched team buses drive off daily with a strange mixture of regret and relief, a combination of FOMO and joy at a couple of hours without orders. Then the coaches would come back and my work would start again with the return of my chief persecutor, Sebastian Loeb. Sebastian Loeb is the bully boy. And in English public school literature, there's quite often a bully boy. It's a grand tradition of books that I'm following in the footsteps of here, which probably started with Tom Brown's school days. Tom Brown had to endure a bully boy by the name of Flashman, who actually became somewhat of a hero himself, thanks to George MacDonald Fraser, who carried on the story of Flashman in other books. Tom Brown's experiences gave him a sort of morality. He began to think about bullies and bullying and how he would try not to be that person. He said, "I want to leave behind me the name of a fellow who never bullied a little boy or turned his back on a big one." That tradition of sort of the fair play carried on with Billy Bunter, another famous British school story. Bunter's catchphrase was, "I say, you fellows, I expect to see fair play." So fair play is a big deal in these books, but quite often there isn't fair play. And always the elites will pick on and prey on the weaker pupils. George Orwell, who went to Crossgate School, said in Such Were the Joys, and this is in 1946, so we're going back a while, he remembers the person who bullied him. And the way he describes the ease and the entitlement of this character is quite interesting. He always felt like an outsider, and he said this: "But even if you climbed to the highest niche that was open to you, you could still only be an underling, a hanger-on of the people who really counted." Roald Dahl, another famous writer for children and young adults, went to a school called Repton School, which he absolutely detested. he had this ubiquitous bully boy. Everybody has the bully boy or girl above him. And he recalled him very vividly. I could remember how he used to saunter across the room in his loose-jointed, elegant way. And if a chair were in his path, he would knock it aside, and I would have to run over and pick it up. He wore silk shirts and always had a silk handkerchief tucked up his sleeve. And his shoes were made by someone called Loeb, who also had a royal crest. They were pointed shoes. And it was my duty to rub the leather with a bone for 15 minutes each day to make it shine. The girls got in on the act with school stories. These were my favourite school stories when I was younger. They're by Antonia Forrest. Yet again, we're in a very, very grand school. The school is called Kingscote School. It has its own chapel and its own grounds and its own playing fields. These were the stories that were feeding me for the experience of writing Stags. The Chalet School, another classic that some of you may know, this time of finishing school. So young ladies who used to be taken to Switzerland and polished for, I'm afraid, nothing more exalted than marrying the right chap. Malory Towers, another very, very famous series. Again, interspersed with the books, there's the bully and the people that are under the bully. But always, the girls are there because they have the money to be there. Take a look at that school on the hill. It's a very interesting building, isn't it? We're going to come back to that. Remember those towers, pointy towers. Malory Towers, as described in the same way I do in Stags, the building is very much part of the character of the book. And if you're good enough to be at this place, you have all these facilities to your hand. This is a description of Malory Towers. The school has 4 towers that are 4 stories high. The kitchen, dining hall, and common rooms are on the ground floor. Dormitories on the 1st and 2nd floor. Teachers' rooms and storage are on the top floor. The school forms a square with a courtyard in the middle. The size of the school is 3 stories high. Between the west and the north towers, there are the classrooms. Between the north and east towers in the SAN and the headmistress's rooms. Between the east and south towers are the entrance, gym, assembly hall, labs, and art room. Between the south and west tower are the mistress's rooms. The school also has stables, tennis courts, sports pitches, and an outside natural swimming pool. Now, I don't know what kind of school you went to, but my school didn't have any of those things. Here's another school with towers. Anybody recognise this one? This, of course, is Hogwarts. And the Harry Potter series, which is 20 years old this year, which makes me feel terribly old too. This really was the shot in the arm for public school literature. And, by the way, had a very interesting consequence. In Britain, public school applications increased, I think, by 4 times in the year that the first book came out, The Philosopher's Stone. So that's very interesting that people, it was wish fulfillment. People did want this kind of life, despite the kind of characters that you might encounter there. Hogwarts has a very particular uniform, a very particular look to the children have to wear, and they have to conform to this look. And that's all part of the deal. It's all part of the privilege and the elitism. You look different to other people, but you look the same as each other, and that's crucial. And in Stags, I gave them a very particular uniform too. This is where, if you went to Hogwarts, you'd be having your dinner, and although there are candles suspended overhead, it's not a million miles away from the great halls of several of the number 1 public schools in England. This is Duke Humphrey's library. This was used in the film as the school library. So again, you can see very, very ancient, very, very privileged, priceless books. And the crest. This is what I was talking about before. So the stag antlers are my crest, Hogwarts has the crest. Now we're going to see a bit of a similarity between this. and other schools. This is Eton, and this is in Windsor, very near Windsor Castle. And this has the privilege of educating many of the royals over the years. And this is how you dress if you go to Eton. So you have white tie and tails. That's the formal look. So if you do go to Windsor and Eton Riverside, you can see these young chaps walking down the street dressed in this way. Sometimes they have festivals and they dress slightly differently. But again, this is all part of the ritual, which is underlining centuries of tradition. And people participate, even if you look a bit of an idiot, you participate. It's part of the deal, and it's part of who you are and who you're about to become. Here are some people you might recognise. So, future King of England, right there. And new bridegroom on the other side. And so William and Harry, both educated at Eton, around the corner from Granny's Castle. This is Harrow, which is another famous public school in England. Eton and Harrow probably considered to be the best. And Harrow is really a town of a school. The school is the town is the school, and it's on a hill. And it's almost like a place of privilege in itself. It's a citadel, it's a castle, and it sits up there above the town, where everyone else lives. I'm thinking of Mitch. This is what you might wear in the summer in Harrow. Rather nice kind of boaters. And again, we can see it's a unique uniform. And you all look the same, but you're not the same. This is rugby. Rugby is a school that, very much like Osney, builds its hierarchy on sport. And rugby, as the name suggests, invented rugby. And it was one of those places, hopefully not now, but that the elitism took the form of how good you were at games. So this very, very strange game, which rugby school has given to the world, originated there. There's a crest. It looks kind of Hogwartsy. It's a very sort of similar, you have an identity and you have a Latin motto, and it's very much part of the package. This is Christ's Hospital, and this school inspired me very much, partly because of the uniform. This is what you wear if you go to Christ's Hospital, and this long coat is almost exactly what I have the kids wearing in Stags. They have a long black coat, a deer leather belt to tie in with the Stags, and then this neckerchief. The interesting thing about Christ's Hospital is you have to wear these yellow stockings. In my book, they have red stockings. They're arterial red, the red of arterial blood, which gives you a little clue as to what might be coming up. So here's an interesting picture of contrasts. School stories don't tend to be about the poor chaps that are looking at the guys in the top hats. The stories seem to be about the guys in the top hats, and the narratives seem to be about them. But yeah, I thought it was a very interesting picture because they're people on the outside looking in. Now this is where I kind of come into the picture. This is not my house, but this is the house I grew up next to. It's a house in North Yorkshire called Langcliffe Hall. And this is where I began to be interested in the whole class and privilege thing, because I lived in, well, you can't see it in the picture, but it's just off the picture to the side. There's a little cottage, and that's the housekeeper's cottage. My granny went into service for a very smart family called the Dawsons. And Geoffrey Dawson, who was the head of the family, was the editor of the Times. And my granny worked for him from the age of 14 to the time when she retired, and she was almost 80 when she retired. And she worked for one family all that time. Somewhere in the middle of that, I lived with her, my sister and I lived with her and were brought up by her in the grounds of this very house. So I had the interesting situation whereby I would go into the house and I would know the family and I would know the sons of the family, but I wasn't a part of it. We were friends, but not really, if you sort of mean. So yeah, I had that experience. And here is where my granny used to work for the family when they had hunting, shooting and fishing weekends. So very, very smart people would come up from London and they would essentially kill things for sport. And that's very interesting to me as a child, thinking about the fact that in England that was sport and that was okay. And it must have been okay because here were all these famous people that I'd heard of coming up from London, people who are in politics or in journalism or in the arts, and they were all doing it. And I think even then I began to think about what would happen if the adults were away and there was a weekend where just the boys were there, just the teenagers, and they brought their friends round, and how quickly things would descend. And under this veneer of being upper class and being very privileged, how savage we actually are at bottom. So I think that really gave me the inspiration for Stags. This was my school. So that's what my school looked like. You'll notice, none of those people are me, by the way, but you'll notice that, I mean, that's what we wore to school. That's what the buildings look like. And you'll see there are no Tudor coats, and there are no crests, and there are no, swimming pools and things like that. This is the school that the boys in the big house went to. This is Giggleswick School, which I think is a great name. And then they went to Ampleforth College. Ampleforth College is in North Yorkshire, and it's run by Jesuit priests. So it really was the kind of archetype for Stags. And it was very austere. And at the time when the boys from the big house went there, you weren't allowed carpets or curtains because carpets and curtains were a luxury. So I didn't really envy them that. This is where things began to get a bit more equitable, or they can get more equitable, you might think at first sight. This is Cambridge University. Theoretically, whatever school you go to in England, you can apply to university. And theoretically, if you're clever enough, you might get in. That's not quite the full story, as I'm going to go on to. I was lucky enough to go to this university. This is Oxford University. So I went from a school that looked like that to a university that looked like that. And this is really where I get Greer's experiences from in Stags, because I don't know if you can imagine, I'd suddenly crossed the Rubicon, as she said, from being the housekeeper's granddaughter to going to a college where I was mixing with the boys from the big house. And suddenly we were friends and we were drinking together in the bar. But again, there's nuance to that, because I didn't look like them, I didn't sound like them, I didn't go skiing every holiday, which they seemed to do. I mean, to me, that was amazing that they used to just go skiing a lot and go to other quite fancy, far-flung places. So there was a little bit of a disconnect there, because I was entering a world that I really knew nothing of, and you have to learn very quickly to fit in. And some people make it easy for you, and some people make it considerably harder. Recognise this library. This is the Hogwarts library. It's the one that was used in the film. This is Duke Humphrey's library in the Bodleian. And this is where I ended up studying. So I ended up studying because I read history, and I ended up studying in the very desks and shelves that was used for Harry Potter. So those worlds sort of started to come together. This is a notorious photograph. So this is the Bullingdon Club. Now, this was a photograph that the gentleman in the middle, that's David Cameron, our ex-Prime Minister. This was a photograph that he was quite anxious to suppress. The Bullingdon Club is a very exclusive Oxford University drinking club. As you might notice, there are no women. And as you also might notice, they're a very particular type. And You have to do all kinds of rather unpleasant things to join the Bullingdon Club. And at one point, there were 3 members of the cabinet, so the people that run the country. There were 3 members of the cabinet that came from the same year in the Bullingdon Club. So that idea of elites and the old school tie and the old boy network is really very present. So there was David Cameron, our beloved ex-PM who brought us Brexit. George Osborne, who is now he was then the Chancellor of the Exchequer, so holding the purse strings for the entire country. Now he's the editor of the London Evening Standard, so he still is exercising power, but in a different way, in the Fourth Estate. This guy you might recognise. He is our answer to Donald Trump. Well, he's got the hair anyway. Our late, very unlamented Foreign Secretary. Also, ex-Bullingdon Club. Also was there at exactly the same time as David Cameron and George Osborne. So although these are jolly school stories, they actually speak to a different and slightly more insidious narrative that are we being run by this incredibly powerful junta of very, very few privileged white men. It's not all bad. It's not all bad. This is Lewis Carroll. And this is where the story starts to come full circle. Lewis Carroll went to rugby school, that one where they were throwing the rugby ball around. Then he went to Oxford. But then he wrote a book that he gave to the world, and then he wrote another book he gave to the world, so Alice in Wonderland and Alice Through the Looking Glass. And you are getting a situation there whereby elites in education are going through elite education, but then they are becoming writers, and they are giving their writings to the world. So yeah, a classic. This is C.S. Lewis, same thing. C.S. Lewis went to Malvern College, and then he went to Oxford, and then he wrote the Narnia books. So I think we kind of have to thank him for that. He was friends with J.R.R. Tolkien, who also went to a smart school, and then to Oxford, and then gave us that, The Lord of the Rings. So it's not all bad, but it is an argument for questioning the patriarchy and questioning where our rulers come from. And it's something that is really very entrenched in British society. And although it's getting better, and I think things like social media and TV and even, you know, YouTube or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever those platforms are making things a little bit more equitable. And they're enabling people to rise up through a meritocracy. We are still very much in England being bound by the old school tie. Thank you.
Thank you for this interesting introduction of a concise, however, of the British boarding public school system. Right? Highly recommended to parents who wants their kids to get to queue up for applying for Eton and Harrow. We all live at we live at very interesting time now, as Theresa May claims that proudly claims that she didn't go to any public school. Instead, she went to Cambridge and became the second woman prime minister in British history. And given, I mean, I may have been misled because I've been reading too much of online Daily Mail rather than Guardian. And so I'm excessively well informed on either the fact or the fiction that the class system is disintegrating most rapidly. There are arguments in in public schools whether Shakespeare should be criticized, if not taken off from the curriculum, and funny stories happening in Eton College, right?
Yes, that's right.
Plagiarism and that sort of things, right?
Yeah, yeah.
All bad news, I think. It's a bad habit that Englishmen exaggerate the dark side of their reality, and pretend to be to the world, to the rest of the world, that the empire is on the decline. I don't know how authentic that kind of rumor is.
Yes. I think it's getting better. I mean, I accept the Theresa May thing, and that was really the nadir of the public school boys in the cabinet, because when there were those three at once, I mean, all of them are now gone. But one has to hope it becomes a bit more equitable going forward. And certainly there are movements to make Parliament more diverse, but I just think it's going to take a long time because there's so much of this history and it's so deeply entrenched in society. I think it's going to take a wee while.
I see. So it's going to be most unlikely, like the extinction of the dinosaurs that would just disappear within a few days, perhaps, according to the archaeological theory, right? I hope it's going to take a very, very long time, even if it goes to the end of extinction.
Yeah.
I hope. Right? Because you have what? Counter forces like globalization, right? Like equal opportunities, right? Or the prospect of a crypto Communist Party member getting into number 10 Downing Street named Jeremy Corbyn, as I've just mentioned. So you don't know what the country is going to.
Yeah.
But tell me, there has been a rise, there seems to be a rise of sense of nostalgia in recent years. Because I left the country 20 years ago. Since then, living on this side of the of the world, I've been seeing things like the Downton Abbey.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And the Enigma game.
Yeah.
And even Boris Johnson, who tries very hard to convince the British people that he's going to be a mini version of Winston Churchill.
Yes, that's right.
And I don't know how well that image is being perceived or received, but it looks like it was going to be. He stands quite a chance, right, for the next for the next occupant of number 10 Downing Street.
Yeah, it could happen. It could happen.
Right. So is there kind of a reactionary trend, right, represented by the privileged class as focus on the boarding school? Although one may argue that David Cameron, George Osborne, and Boris Johnson may represent three types of idiocy.
Yes, exactly. That's
So
their version of diversity, I
Yeah.
think. Three different idiots, yeah.
Yeah, three different idiots, but of the same kind. Different, but of the same
Yeah,
kind.
that's right.
So what would be the alternative then if someone like Theresa May doesn't work out, right? A girl from the boarding from grammar school ending up in Cambridge, or the alternative would be what?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Marxism. Or-
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. That's right.
So-
Who knows?
But thanks to the propaganda represented by Harry Potter, right?
Yes. Yeah. I think that's very
many
much
people-
part of the revival, as you're saying, the
Oh, yes.
nostalgia.
Nostalgia, yes. And people in the rest of the world still believe that, right? The center of this British tradition or class system may hold before the second coming happens.
Yeah.
Right? Especially when you have the most unpredictable monster on the other side of the Atlantic now, right? Raging big political storms.
Yeah. Imagine
Because
that. Boris
tweeters-
Johnson and Trump, two bombshell
Oh,
blondes
yes.
on either side of the Atlantic.
Right.
You couldn't write it, could you?
Yes. What different nightmares, either Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn faced with the prospect of a re-elected Donald Trump then.
Yeah.
You wonder where the world is going to be taken to, right? But those paragraphs you just read out, I think, most enlightening, and it's all boarding school education about, right? Just to be different, not to pay a high tuition fees in order to get your kids to go to Oxford or Cambridge as believed or by most parents in China and Hong Kong, but just to be trained as different person, right?
Yeah.
And that's hard to perceive. That's hard to conceive. It's a bit difficult to conceive for most parents, because here in China we are trained for more than 2,000 years not to be different, not to be different from what the emperor orders or says.
Yeah.
So there is a bit of a clash of values here.
Yes.
Because most parents in China and Hong Kong have very little idea about the British privileged education system. They think it's a shortcut for the kids, for the children, to go to Oxford and Cambridge to earn a degree in engineering or business studies or whatever,
Yeah.
instead of Latin literature or
Yes.
history.
Yeah. That's right.
So, I mean, it's going to be I don't know, very, very interesting time. Right?
Yes.
So, what has inspired you into adopting such writing style on such themes? Is it because of the clash of values or cultures within yourself?
Yeah, I
Someone
think so.
from, as you say, from Manchester, the grandchild of a housekeeper,
Yeah. Yeah.
then
that's
half
right.
Venetian, right? And then living at the time of globalization, internet, the post-Tony Blair era,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Which is very must be very confusing for someone like you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah?
Well, I think it made me understand being an outsider, and I think when I
Both an outsider and an insider.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. That's the tension, isn't it? That's what kind of happens to Greer, because she goes from a what we would call a comprehensive school, quite a rough school, into one of these extremely privileged schools. So she is of the school, but even within the school, she is made to feel an outsider by this very attractive, charismatic clique called the Medievals. And the Medievals, as you rightly said out there, clinging on to nostalgia, and nostalgia is almost a cult, because they are harking back to colonial times. They're harking back to the times before social media and tech, and they reject tech. They reject smartphones, and they reject anything of that nature, because I think it helps them to retain control, and they're afraid of it. They're afraid of technology. And I think that's something we all have to wrestle with, really. How much tech is too much? Can we put the genie back in the bottle? If we can, should we? I mean, what can be done about all of that? So that's part of what the Medievals are using as their stranglehold on the other children.
I wonder how effectively Wi-Fi or the use of mobile phone are being banned as top public schools like Eton and Harrow.
Yeah, you do hear of that happening. Funnily enough, since I wrote Stags, I've been seeing in the news that headmasters and headmistresses are banning phones at school, and so it seems to be happening. Yeah, it's very interesting, and I think people are asking themselves a lot of questions about data and privacy, since especially the Facebook thing with Cambridge Analytica, and people are worried about their data, and the reaction has been, in some parts of America actually, young adults are deciding to go off-grid and completely get rid of their social media because they want to be in charge of their own data. So I think that's maybe the direction. There will be a backlash at some point, because we share an awful lot of our lives.
Right.
And I think we're giving away power every time we share data. So that's something that young adults today have to wrestle with, that I didn't have to worry about back in the day.
Too much data or information, not enough knowledge.
Yes, exactly.
Too many sound bites, but not enough quotation.
Well put.
Too many certificates or degrees, but not enough integrity, perhaps. Right? This is the world we face with.
Yeah.
And at times of chaos in the past 300 years, what the rest of the world looked up to Britain. Right?
Yeah, that's
Ranging
right.
from, I don't know, Lord Nelson, right, to Winston Churchill,
Yes.
or even Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah.
But now it seems that we're faced with a vacuum,
Yeah, that's right.
a state of emptiness, nothingness.
Yeah, that's very much how it feels, actually. Yeah, yeah.
So that makes, I don't know, well, the last Etonian prime minister made the most horrible judgment by holding the referendum, right? As far as I know. Many parents since then, right, in Hong Kong decided not to let their children go to Eton, even if they're offered a place when their kids are 3 years old.
Wow, yeah, yeah.
That's really awful. But anyway, any questions or sharing of or thoughts from the audience? Yes, please, yes.
Thank you for Ms. Donne, and thank you for Ms. Bennett, and for this fantastic reading feast. So it seems that promoting reading is a global challenge. A couple of years ago, there's an activity in London. Celebrities, they left their favorite books at the metro stations. So they and hoping that their influences could motivate a younger generation to read. So the very Harry Potter girl, Emma Watson, did that. But unfortunately, it caused a very big traffic disaster instead of achieving the results what it meant to be at the very first place. So I was wondering, could you share with us how you developed your enthusiasm in reading and writing? So can you share with our younger generations?
That's a very interesting question. I would have said, when I embarked on Stags, I used to think that social media was the enemy of reading. I used to think that it was one or the other, and that reading had been replaced in a lot of ways by screens. And when I was younger, long time ago, when I was a young adult, it was very much easier to be a reader because there were so few alternatives. There is now so many claims on your time. But I am not worried too much about social media now because I think that there's an enormously strong young adult community online. And it's actually fostering reading in a lot of ways. And I think that a lot of people join forums and a lot of people connect online through various platforms. So I actually think that we in the book world have to get on board with that, really. And the way to promote reading is to bring it online in a way and to encourage it that way. And although physical books are very popular among young adults, and I'm very happy that they are, I think just having reading forums and book groups online is also a good idea because, I mean, just want people to read and any way it can be encouraged is fantastic. And if we use your medium to get readers, then, I think we should do it.
Yeah, thank you. That's why Hong Kong Book Fair seems so fantastic.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
Yes. You look like as if you had been to a British boarding school and Italy
I'm
for
flattered.
vacation.
Flattered. Thank you for coming all the way from London to Hong Kong for this festival.
Absolute pleasure.
I'm really privileged to have you here. And I just have a few more questions for you to ask. And first of all, by the sounds of it, the narrator from the island, you used the first-person narrative voice to, go through the course of the story. Is it anything special about it? Is it just to make it as an outsider of the novel to look at the deficits of the class system or anything to do with that? And my second question is do you believe there's trend going on about the disappearance of Englishness in the British society, or things. People like, the Conservative Party, like the backbenchers MP, like Jacob Rees-Mogg, becomes like not a very popular figure anymore, and people become more liberals, like from both sides of the party, and
Yeah, that's very interesting. I wonder if so Brexit has been a big deal, obviously, and I wonder if part of what you're saying is that the people that want to leave the European Union are maybe somehow clinging on to that Englishness and that concept of Englishness, and they're worried that it is disappearing, and they're clinging on to that. And I wonder if people like Mr. Rees-Mogg, who almost seemed like a cartoonish figure of the old Etonian. I don't actually have the information to hand whether he is an old Etonian, but I could make a pretty good guess that he went to one of about 4 schools I could name. But I wonder if, there is, maybe that is part of the nostalgia that Chip was mentioning, that it's clinging on to our sort of a national identity at the same time. Just to come to your first question. So first person, I'm using, actually in both instances I've used first person, and I find it very sort of immediate. I think it's a great way to speak to, a lot of young adult literature, as I understand it, is in the first person, and I feel like it is a very immediate way to speak to the reader. I also made the point yesterday, we were talking about it, that social media is in the first person. So you're always describing the gig that you went to, or what you had for dinner. It's your photograph of your stuff, and that's, I think that's why it works very well in book form. It's very, very immediate. It's straight from you to the reader, and there's no sort of filter. So I haven't attempted yet to do third person, but maybe I will. But I'm very fond of this kind of format. But also, as you rightly say, it's an interesting way to communicate. Both of my protagonists are outsiders. And I think the thing about first person is that you have the innermost thoughts, and you have that stream of consciousness also, almost, that you can hear directly what they're thinking, and then their impressions of everything. But I suppose the thing about that is that they're also your filter, they're your editor, and you're believing what might be an unreliable narrator. And in The Island in particular, without giving any spoilers, he does become a slightly unreliable narrator because he begins to believe in himself as a leader and as a...
But do you think Britain has gradually turns into classless society or not?
No.
But I've encountered some of the books like having that kind of topics in Waterstone in London. And
Okay, so you think it? Yeah, okay. I would say that I think it's getting better, but I think it's got an awfully long way to go. I think that some of these things are so entrenched. Some of the things that you saw on the screens there, like wearing flowers in your hat on May Day, possibly went back to, the 1100s, say. So it's just it's been so long. It's kind of like turning an enormous cruise ship around. It's going to take a bit of time, I think. But I think there are improvements. And yeah, I think there is an argument for saying that we are becoming classless. But I just think that it's still sort of hanging on.
thank you.
Hi, I
Hello.
have 2 questions, if that's okay.
Okay.
One is, how do you avoid cliche when you're writing about the class system? Sort of the disapproving granny or aunt drinking tea, or the spoiled rich boy at school. Yeah. Do you want me to say my second question?
Oh, shall I take that one first?
Okay.
Because there's a danger I forget the first one and then betray myself as an idiot. Yes, so I think that, I don't know. It's not for me to say whether I have avoided cliches in Stags, in either one. I think I maybe attempted to subvert. So characters I've set up as evil, I like to think that I've added some nuance. So there's not anybody that's absolutely Flashman awful. I think everybody in the book has got something to redeem them, or they have some sort of fault. So I'm trying not to write cartoon characters or tropes. But again, you'd have to tell me if that's been successful or not.
The second question is, when you're writing in the first person, is that, when you're writing sort of thriller mystery, is that an adversary to that, or does it help you when you're in the... Because I know you can't speak for other characters when you're writing in the first person.
Yeah, it can be. With Stags in particular, because I was heading for a twist, there's kind of a big finish and then there's sort of a twist. And that's tricky when you're dealing with first person, because you're kind of rationing information, and it's all about how much you give away and when. And then there's another strange thing happening, which is sometimes your own character isn't aware of something that they've seen or they've noticed. So you have them registering something like the picture was upside down, say. And so the protagonist is telling you that, and they're saying it in the narration, but they don't know themselves that the picture's turned around because there's a, I don't know, passageway. This is not in the book, by the way. But you see what I mean? So they themselves aren't aware. So at that point, you're sort of being God in the machine, and you're having to ration the spoilers, as it were. So that makes it a bit tricky. But otherwise, I just think there's so many pros to it that I think I will stick with it for now, I think. Anybody else?
Any more questions from the floor?
Yeah, there's someone at the back.
Hello. So
Hello.
We had the experience of Miss Bennett as a local British lady of the class system in Britain. How about Mr. Tsao? Your experience in England, mingling up with people, local Brits of middle class, middle upper class, and also upper class. So what's the experience of that? Or do you have that experience as a foreign student or international student when you were in England? Thank you.
Well, I'm a bit ashamed to tell you that my experiences of mixing with the so-called upper class British has been rather narrow. You know, in the past 20 years, as someone living in Hong Kong, I would see the highest, most aristocratic person I've mixed with was someone called David Tang, who was sadly passed away. Otherwise, he would have moderated this talk instead of me, because my parents were not that well off to have sent me to any boarding school in Britain. Instead, I went to a college for higher and further education in Maidstone in Kent, where the huts and sheds on the green grass of that college campus was more or less like that distinctive but rather uniquely different picture. So my acquired knowledge later in my life has come from some people who had been to those schools, right? Or films and novels like this, for me to conjecture or imagine, right, a bit about what the life of the British class system could be like. However, it's fantastic to it's fascinating to look at Britain, because it's a country, it's a bunch of cultural contradictions, if not differences, carefully laid out, right, throughout many hundred years, from King John, right, to Queen Elizabeth I, to the turbulent 19th century, where different classes just clashed with each other, so that it ended up like something like this: at one end you have Downton Abbey, at the other hand you have what? Mr. Bean, or the punks, you know, or some most ludicrously comical cartoon characters, right? Comical characters like the Benny Hill Show, whatever. You know, just like at one end you have the Spectator, at the other end you have the Mirror and the Sun. Right? So Britain is a complex myth to most people, and life is just too short to know an all-round Britain. I would claim, you know, my experience about the country has been really partial. You know. I've got some middle-class friends, and middle-class, and I admire someone like David Tang, who kept telling people that how regrettably he only had the mobile phone number of Prince Charles, but he never got the mobile phone number of the Queen, which he considered as part of his imperfection in his achievement, right? You haven't met this man, have you? If you've read the Financial Times until something like last year, you might have the privilege of reading some of his weekly columns, right? He's really a character of fun, right? But anyway, going back to the novel, the use of the first-hand narrative itself, I think, is the best way to avoid any cliche, because it just let the reader know right away that everything is seen through the eyes of a teenager character, and I think the degree of cynicism as displayed as embodied in the paragraph you've just read. The food too is different from normal school food in that it is really nice. Instead of German and French, we study Latin and Greek, right? And these are all sentences typically English, right?
Yeah.
With understatements, with the kind of hidden snobbery, right? Within the lines, right? So you have to taste it word by word, line by line. I just wonder how these books have been received in America. Whether when you mention things like, for the first 1,000 years, so there were just 4 houses as texts: Honorius, Betty, Oswald, and Paulinus. Then a few decades ago, they started to admit girls, so they founded a new girls' house called Lightfoot. I was told that in my admissions letter that the Lightfoot dormitories were in one of the more modern buildings, right? Sense of snobbery in it.
Yeah.
Why the modern buildings are less desirable.
Yes.
Where the messages, tiny messages like this,
Yeah.
have been comprehended, understood, or received by internet users,
Yeah.
right? Of that generation in America.
Yeah. Interestingly, it's done very well in America, and
Harry Potter has done very well
Yes.
in promoting
Yeah.
such messages.
yeah,
right?
absolutely. And I think there's just a fascination with English culture. As you rightly say, Downton Abbey is huge. The Crown is huge over there as well. And obviously the wedding this summer became huge because that was a very interesting conjunction of 2 royal families. So Meghan was Hollywood, which is America's royalty, and then our royalty. And there just has been an appetite for stags. I mean, happily for me, it's gone down very well indeed. And I just think there's a real fascination with the British upper classes at play, or being very serious as they
Yes.
get in that one.
Yes. Right?
Similar theme, like to use school as a background to talk about like social dilemmas and issues and so on. But it would be interesting to sort of like blend with like dystopian themes within the novel as well. What kind of effect is that? Like if there's different genres, put it all in one inside a novel?
Oh, yeah, I don't know really. I mean, I guess mine is sort of is a school novel, but a thriller as well. So I mean, that's the only kind of mashup I've got going on there. But yeah, I like the idea of having a dystopian, because Ishiguro's work is futuristic, isn't it? I think it's set in the near future.
It's about clones.
Yeah, that's right. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see where this would go, like where not just this genre, but it'd be interesting to consider what public schools would be like in the future, or a dystopian kind of Handmaid's Tale kind of Gilead type place. But yeah, it'd be interesting to have the kind of the futuristic, I can't even speak, the futuristic public school novel. It'd be interesting to see where that goes. You may have given me an idea there.